Cool. Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to an evening with Saima Mir, author of the book that was released today, The Khan. Thank you so much to Waterstones for hosting this event and putting us in conversation. My name is Nikesh Shukla. I am a writer and a friend of Saima's, and I'm really excited to talk about the book. Hi, Mariam. How you doing? Mariam's here. Okay, so I am going to do that awkward thing, Saima, of talking about you in the third person like you're not here. But there is a bio to read. Saima Mir is an award-winning journalist. She started her career at the Telegraph and Argus. I've got a funny story about them. And went on to work for the BBC. She is the recipient of the Commonwealth Broadcast Association's World View Award, and has written for The Times, The Guardian and The Independent. Her essay for It's Not About the Burqa appeared in The Guardian weekend and received over 250,000 hits in 2 days. She has also contributed to the anthology The Best Most Awful Talk. 20 mothers talk honestly about motherhood. She grew up in Bradford and now lives in London, and this is her first book. And it's out today, The Khan. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you feeling? Your first book is out.
It's amazing. I'm overwhelmed. I keep saying that it's better than having a baby, although it probably is emotional as well. It's sort of I've done some crying today. It's been really surreal. It's that thing of, you know, when you've been climbing a mountain and then you just focus on getting to that top, and then you get there and you realize, God, I'm exhausted. It's here and I'm exhausted. So it's been great fun and tiring as well.
So we're going to talk about the book in a second, and you're going to read a short passage from it. But excuse me, given that this is a book launch in COVID times, I have to ask the inevitable question that we are not tired of. How has your lockdown been? Specifically lockdown 3. How has lockdown 3 been for you?
Lockdown 3 hasn't been good. Lockdown 1 was okay because it was kind of exciting as well, which sounds strange, but it was like, okay, what's going on? My husband was working from home, so we were seeing him all the time. That was great. But 3's been hard. It's been exhausting. And I've got 3 small boys who are they're like stereotypical boys, unfortunately. I don't know if that's unfortunate or fortunate, but they've just been cooped up in the house, been cold outside. So it's been tough.
Punching everything.
Sorry? Punching everything, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of casual violence in my house. That's them, not me. You know, when people say they want to raise gender neutral children, they don't know what they're talking about. So yeah, I'm glad that they're back at school.
And the book is out. The book has it's been a long time coming. We'll get into your journey to publication in a bit, because I think it's a really interesting story. But I wondered if we could just talk a bit about The Khan first, and get you to read from it, just to kind of give us a flavour. Do you want to set up what the book is about, and then tell us what you're going to read?
So the book is about the reluctant daughter of a criminal kingpin called Jia Khan. She's a very brilliant barrister. She lives in London. She grew up in this fictional town in the north of England. And it's about, she receives a phone call. She has to go back for her sister's wedding, and her brother is kidnapped and her father's killed. And it's about her being drawn back into that life of the criminal fraternity. It's about justice and family loyalty and blood, and crossing the lines that we think lie between right and wrong. A lot of stuff. So just, you know, your basic light-hearted read.
It's such a compelling, dramatic thriller that keeps you guessing, and I think that the real strength of it is Gia. Like, she's such a brilliantly drawn character, and we're gonna dig into how you constructed her in a bit. But if you could read for us from, I think you're going to read from the prologue.
I'm going to read the prologue, which is obviously right at the start of the book, so I will bear with me, because I'm a bit overwhelmed and nervous today. I've not really read a whole prologue before, so bear with me. I'll give it my best shot. The frayed fabric of the black niqab scratched at her nose, and she raised her hand to adjust it, bringing it taut over her lips. She hurried on. The setting sun worried her. She would be late for work. Broken syringes and grain condoms lay spent, caught between the pavement and the road, trying to disappear into the sewers beneath. Engine oil mixed with rain pooled around them and spread into the gutter. Ahead of her, a new Bentley waited, its engine purring gently. Further up and across the road, a bruised blonde working girl leaned into a sheenless VW Golf. Hidden behind grubby old textile mills, this forgotten strip of land equalized rich and poor. They all came here from near and far to have their cars looked at and their bodies serviced. The young Muslim woman's eyes, watchful, hollow, and kohl-rimmed, moved from lamppost to lamppost and then to street corner. For one brief moment, her resolve weakened, and she considered turning around and heading home, but then she remembered the final demand letter her mother had handed her and as she'd been leaving, and something tightened in her stomach. Sakina, her name was, and as she pulled her arms tight around herself, hoping their warmth would melt some of the hardness that had set in, she reminded herself of its meaning, serenity. Bas thode saal ho ne putter, her mother had told her, her tone as gentle as her coarse Punjabi would allow. Once your brother finishes university, he will take care of everything. But only Sakina knew what those few years were costing. She was paying with more than money for the university fees, rent, bills, and bread her family needed. Her father's death had come suddenly, and he hadn't had time to make provision for his wife and children. He had been a good man, and she missed him with an all-encompassing heaviness in her heart. He had always been proud of Sakina, and she wondered what he would have thought of her now. But there was little time to stop and contemplate such things today. Quickening her pace, she stepped over the shadow of a short, stocky man who was leaning against a blackened wall. He sucked on a cigarette, pulling smoke into his fat fist as he spoke to the driver of the Bentley. Sakina walked past him. He paused as if recognizing her and then offered his salam. She nodded in acknowledgement and crossed the road. The red heels of her shoes clicked hard. They weren't made for cobbles. The blonde prostitute was also struggling to balance on the stones. Brushing back her hair, the hooker rubbed her hand suggestively up her thigh, a small skirt leaving little to the imagination. She leaned into the driver's window of the car, the skirt rising further up her thighs, revealing the marks left by previous clients. Sakina stole a glance at the punter in the Golf as she passed, measuring him up, taking in his cropped black hair, pockmarked skin, and the blue-green tattoo on the side of his head. There was something menacing about him, something that made her take the black satin of her niqab and pull it tighter over her painted lips. He turned and looked back at her, his empty eyes burning right through her as if he could see what she looked like under her parda. She hurried on. Realizing she was about to lose another customer, the prostitute swore loudly at Sakina. That's right, why don't you just fuck off, bloody ISIS lover? Her words backfired and her potential client looked at her in disgust. Ladies shouldn't talk like that, he said, peeling her fingers off his car and drawing up the window. She stood her ground, refusing to leave. Oh, darling, don't be like that for some dirty packy. But the driver had made up his mind and he turned the key in the ignition, the car edging forward slowly and hugging the curve of the curb. When he reached the 620 bus shelter where Sakina was waiting, he switched off the headlights and rolled down the window, the engine still letting its readiness be known. The sun had now buried itself deep into the ground. The only light came from the street light next to Sakina, spotlighting her in its orange glow. She tried to look past the man, focusing on something, anything in the distance. His smile remained fixed. She turned away, but not before catching a glimpse of the purple banknotes he was holding. She turned back, watched as he counted the cash slowly and deliberately. She looked at his face again, making a mental note and itemizing his features as she'd been taught to do by the other girls. She eventually stood up, walked to the car and climbed in. The punter leaned across the leather seat and respectfully helped her adjust her seatbelt, breathing her in as he did so. You brown girls are hard work, he told her, but your smell alone is worth it. Sakina pulled down her niqab and smiled. She lifted the folds of her black burqa to cross her legs, revealing thin leather stilettos and dark olive skin. The man grinned. He loved this city.
Brilliant, thank you so much. Before we get started, just some housekeeping. I'm sure people are very well versed in how to do Zoom events, but there is a Q&A function. You can ask questions there, and we will get to them towards the end. And also, if you want to use the chat function, make sure it's selected for all panelists and all attendees. So, okay, Simon, I met you in 2017 at a workshop, at the Word Factory workshop hosted that I was leading. That Word Factory is a project run by Kathy Galvin, and we chatted online a bunch of times. And you told me about this novel that you were writing, and I was like, "This sounds amazing. Why has this not been published yet?" And you were like, "Oh, I don't know." And what I wanted to talk about is when you started writing this and kind of your road to publication, because so often the story about writers that we tend to hear is, "Oh, I wrote this while I was on a week's retreat at my father's Lake Como palace, and then I sold it for a low six-figure advance, and I'm an overnight success." But actually, the majority of writers, it's about graft, and it takes time. And I think yours is such a story of persistence and resilience, and just keeping going and believing in this project, that I just think that for the writers who are watching this, I think it will really strike a chord with them, that if they keep going, if they love what they're doing, then it will come.
Yes.
So if you could just talk us through when you came up with the idea, and how those initial drafts right through to it coming out.
So I am definitely not an overnight success of any kind. I actually wrote the first draft of this 7 years ago when I was pregnant, and I thought this overnight success thing was what happened. I thought that was how people got published. You wrote this book, you sent it off, and it didn't happen. And I wrote it, and it literally, I didn't know what to do with it. I knew it needed work, but I just didn't know. And I was scrambling around in the dark trying to figure it out. I didn't know anyone who had written a novel, so I didn't really know how it worked. I knew that you got the writers and artists notebook, yearbook, but literally I couldn't do anything with it. I tried to edit it, and but one thing I know now from working with this brilliant editing team at Point Blank is, and with Arzu, after I spoke to you, is you need good feedback. So I just kept working on it, but I just didn't think anything was going to happen. And I remember having a conversation with you, and you at that time had this kernel of this idea of the Good Literary Agency, which didn't actually come into being till 2 years later, I think, which was after I had had another baby. So I had a bonus baby, and I thought, this is never going to happen. I'm not going to be able to get this book done. So I quit. I just was like, there's just nothing I can do about this. It's going to have to stay there. And even though I loved it and I believed in it, I just couldn't see what was going to happen. And I sent it to you. You'd set up the agency, and then you introduced me to Arzu, and she gave me some amazing feedback. But it was like, you've got to go and do this work. You've got to do the edit before we'll consider even taking you on. So I did that, and then I was lost again. I thought, it needs more work. And I remember emailing you, and you were like, yeah, you just got to do the work, because obviously you must have so many people emailing you, and you have to do that. And then I submitted it. No, then my essay came out in It's Not About the Burqa, and it had that amazing response. And I remember I'd sent you the new draft, and I got a text from you saying, don't sign with anybody else. They're going to sign you. And that was it. But that was 7 years of sticking with the story, working on it, editing it, getting lost with it, asking lots of people, what do I do with this? I just really loved it. I just really believed in it, and I just couldn't give it up.
Can you talk a bit about why you can give it up? Because I think, undertaking a novel is such an investment. You're going to be talking about this for the next 5 years. You've already spent 7 years working on it. You really have to believe in this. So can you just talk about what it was about it that you can get from
I love the characters. I love the people who I created. And I know I'm jokingly said it's like having a baby, but they literally are. They live in my head. They're like my family. And it's really hard. I mean, don't get me wrong, because when you say to somebody, I'm writing a book, they're like, yeah, why don't you get a real job? You know, they don't understand unless they see money or, you know, some kind of output. They just think this is just a hobby. They don't understand the commitment that it takes. And I mean, I remember my aunt ring me up and say, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing a normal job? You know, what's going on? And I was like, because this is what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to create this thing. And even afterwards, actually, when I'd got the deal and nobody knew, and she rang me up and she was like, so what happened to that little project of yours? And I said, oh, well, actually, I've sold it, and it's been optioned by the BBC. But I just couldn't, they lived in my head, and I felt as if I left them there, I was doing a disservice. It sounds really strange, but it was like they were in suspended animation, and I just had to keep going back. And also, I just didn't see this story anywhere. I just didn't see it on bookshelves. And I wanted to read it. I literally wanted to write the book that I would want to pick up and read. And the truth is, I'm really hard on myself generally. Nothing I do ever comes up to my standard. But I feel that way about this book. And I do love it. And I miss spending time with those characters in it.
And that passion is so important. And it really comes through on the page. So can you talk a bit about what kind of happened afterwards? Because I think one of the things that we don't really talk about a lot to writers is what happens once you kind of find an agent, and then what and how it then comes out. And actually, that's probably the bit that people should talk more about, because it just sort of makes the process more transparent.
So I did, I don't know if I did another edit after I signed with Abby at the wonderful Abby Fellows, hello. But then Abby took it out, and I think she's never told me this, but I kind of think that the expectation was that there would be a few people bidding on it, but there wasn't. There was only Point Blank who came back. They came back quickly. They said, we want this book. And then I think a lot of people said, oh, we really like it, but we don't really know what to do with it. I think they just didn't know how to market it. So thankfully, Point Blank were brilliant, and I signed them. And then they came back with Jenny Parrott, who had given it the go-ahead, came back with more edits and sort of said to me, I think it was sort of, what she said to me was she really liked it, and she wanted me to, I think, thicken up G a bit. So the great advice she gave me was, you just need to live with her for a weekend. When you go out, think about what she would eat. If you go to the supermarket, what is she going to buy? When someone says something to you, what would she say? So it was this great weekend of like, what would Gia Khan do? Which is quite a scary prospect when you read the book.
Yeah.
I did that, and it really made her alive. And I think everything else was alive, and I think she was a bit two-dimensional until that point. But it didn't take much to thicken it up, because the structure of it was there, and there was just the nuances of it that needed adding. And I think Jenny asked me to develop a couple more things. So she just said, maybe you should develop this relationship a bit more. What do you think of this? And I'm quite time poor as well. But because I'd done that 7 years of grafting and trying to edit it, I was able to sit down and just do that, what she'd asked, in a very short amount of time, because I'd already done the developing of the craft and the book. So that happened, and then at that point she loved it and said, this is brilliant, you've done it. And then it went to another editor who checked it through for plot holes, because it's quite a complex plot. And that was the lovely Helen, who was brilliant, and she had questions about, is this happening, why is that happening? And a lot of the thing that they wanted to do was, because this is a book about a completely different culture, was not make it too easy for, we didn't want to put translation in there, but wanted to make it nuanced enough so that it would be evident what was happening. So that happened, and then it was copy edit. So it took 2 years from signing the deal to this point.
And the copy edit thing is always like, it's always so horrible, because, you know, what I think what a lot of people don't know is when you work with your editor, you do all the big structural things, all the big changes, and then a copy editor comes along and goes, you know, you use the word really 17 times in
Yeah.
and then you're like, oh, so what do you know now that you didn't know 7 years ago when you started it?
That books are a team effort. I literally thought someone went away and wrote this brilliant masterpiece alone, and then they just printed it. I now think about it. What did I? You actually. I love that I'm with a small publisher. I've worked with everybody I've worked with has been female, which has been wonderful. And feedback is great, but also feedback. What had happened is after 7 years of rejection, I had developed a thick skin, and I thought I craved criticism, critique of my work. I was craving it. I wanted it. So every time I got somebody saying, this is what you need to do, I was like, brilliant, I'll do it. But it is exhausting because it is criticism at the end of the day. So that's one thing I did learn was, yeah, it's great to get good at accepting rejection, and it's great to take on feedback, but you do have to pace yourself when you do those edits. Because I got burnt out, I think, at one point where I was like, I really don't want to look at this ever again in my life.
Yeah, that's one thing we kind of skipped over a little bit. Before I met you, like, it had been rejected by a lot.
It had been rejected. It couldn't be sold. I had an agent who couldn't sell it. It was just literally just sat there. There was just nothing. Nobody wanted it. And I didn't know what to do with it because I did love it. And I did think, this is the story I want to tell first. They just couldn't, nobody could do anything with it.
So let's talk about Gia Khan, because, you know, I don't know, you've given us an insight into spending a day in her shoes, which, yeah, must have been terrifying. But can you remember the moment she arrived in your head?
So it was actually a comment from a friend. I had sat down to write a story, and I wanted to write something Godfather-esque because I loved that story of family. And I'd worked in local papers, so I knew a lot about crime stories. And then a friend said to me, why don't you write it as a woman? And just in that moment, it just clicked, because she just suddenly was real, because I could just put myself in her. And then it was actually a slow progress of making her to where she goes to talk to the Jogar, this group of men. And initially, when I wrote the chapter, it was full of a lot of passion. But actually, over the years, as I've sat with the story and looked at it, I realised she wouldn't overtly shout at those men, and those men wouldn't respond to that anyway. So it was almost like that time I got to know her, and how she responded, and I also got to know myself as well through that process, which sounds a bit Brené Brown, but who I do love. But yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. So when we meet her, she's a lawyer who, while she kind of has a lot of affection for her family, you know, stuff has kind of driven them apart a little bit, and it does the ruthlessness that she sort of displays throughout the novel. It's coded into her from the start, and I wondered if you, because, you know, like The Godfather is an interesting comparison, because, you know, Michael Corleone, you know, he's quite gentle to begin with, and it's sort of like, as his power increases, so does his ruthlessness. And with Gia, it sort of feels slightly different. It feels like she knows who she is from the exact first moment that we meet her.
Yeah. For her, it's survival. That thing that's coded into her is a survival instinct. She's armored up because of what's happened to her, and she's in complete survival mode. So in that way, it kind of goes the opposite of The Godfather, because you see him become powerful, but she is confident in who she is.
And she's powerful in her own world as well.
She's powerful in her own world, and she knows who she is. So part of it was myself. As you get older as a woman, you become more confident in the things that you know, and you care less about the world. And as the book goes and you kind of see what happens to her, she doesn't care. It's not that she's cold, it's that she has pared back the things that she is bothered about. And she's bothered about her family and she loves them. And up until she goes back, she knows that they're safe because her father is there doing the taking care of. But when she needs to step up, she does. So she's uncompromising.
And you know, the thing that you described earlier, which was interesting. What one of the comments that your editor had made was that you hadn't necessarily dug deep enough with Gia, but it was structurally very sound. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about that structure and how you pulled it together, because it does feel like it draws from such a great palette of brilliant influences. So I just wondered if you could talk a bit about that.
The structure of the book as a whole.
Yeah.
One of the things I'd love to do, and one of the things I did when I was developing my ability to write, was read screenplays. I love screenplays. I love the bang, bang, bang of screenplays. And it also really sits well with my journalistic training of pare it back, so you get the thrill of each scene. Each scene leads into another. Each scene, you come in, you leave early, which was how I structured the book. So initially I wrote it as a screenplay, and then I transferred it, used each scene and made it into a chapter. So that's how the structure of it works for me. Also, because I love to read, but I read for pleasure. I've never really read for intellectual fulfillment. And I feel as if anyone who's giving me their time needs to feel they've gotten something out of that chapter and out of that page. I'm really conscious of that. One thing I'm really conscious of is not wasting someone's time. It's so precious, isn't it? And you know, when someone's going to hand you their money, I want to make sure they get their money's worth from each chapter and from each evening they spend reading that book. I want them to be, God, I've really got to get to the next one. And I'm conscious of that for every chapter that I write, that it needs to be like that. So that's how I structured it. I wrote it as a screenplay. I knew the beginning and I knew the end. I kind of didn't really, I thought, all right, I'll muddle through the middle, but I knew that each chapter had to have something phenomenal happen in it.
And how did you, because obviously writing is a very solitary thing, and this deals with some really, really dark stuff. So I wondered how you kind of kept your sense of self when you were working on some of the darker edges of the book.
So
I'm sort of tiptoeing around a lot of stuff because I don't want people to know until they read it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to get too into the nitty gritty of the plot, but
so
stuff happened.
So I wrote this book, and I honestly thought I was writing some like soft commercial fiction. Not that commercial fiction is soft, but light, something light reading. That's what I mean. I thought I was writing something like that. And then when it was edited and the proof came and I reread it, and I said to my husband, I said, I've read this thing, darling. There's a lot of rage on the page and it's really dark and twisty. And he looked at me and he said, Saima, I've never known you to be anything but dark and twisty. So that's the truth of it. I think, and actually, this is going to make me sound like a real psychopath, but for me, I think I am that dark and twisty, and writing is like the pressure, taking the pressure off a pressure cooker. Does that make sense? I don't think people realize that about me because they see me pushing a buggy, 3 kids. But actually, I grew up in the city of Bradford, and I worked as a crime reporter as well. I worked as a reporter and I covered crime stories, and I did that for TV as well. When you do that, you are exposed to some horrible stuff. I mean, and you know, if you go and cover court stories and you see criminals literally stood there, and you become quite immune to things. You know, in newsrooms we talk about, you go do a death knock, you know, there's like, you literally turn up at someone's house and say, you know, someone says died, can I do a tribute piece to your child or whatever? And so you have quite a thick skin, and I'm not saying it's necessarily good, but so that's my kind of background and my training in this. So what seems dark to the layperson is something I dealt with on a daily basis.
That's really, really interesting, and you can really, really see it as well, that authenticity that is there. Tell me about the rage on the page, though.
That's just me, rage on the page. I think as a woman, one is exposed to lots of things, and especially if you're like, I'm brown, I'm Muslim, and lots of people bring their lenses to that. And I got to a point where it just makes me angry, makes me upset that, hang on, why can't you just see me as a person? Why are you seeing me as this thing? And because I don't see myself as that, I just see myself as a person. And it would make me angry. And I think part of that is, I write about maternal rage. One of the essays I've written about is maternal rage and the disrespect that women is heaped upon women. I think that filtered through this idea that we're invisible. You're pushing a buggy, no one sees you, or you've had a baby, so suddenly you're not intelligent, or you're a working mother, so you're not good enough, or you're stay-at-home mother, so you clearly don't have an intelligent perspective. And I had all those things, and I had a career, and I'd worked for the BBC, and I'd worked for, you know, lots of papers. So I'm still clever. I'm still as intelligent as I was when I had that BBC email address. Why don't you see me? So all those things. Also, you know, that thing, I know we read it everywhere. If you're not hungry, you're not paying enough attention. Mm. There's a lot of things going on, and I seep all that in, and it transferred, I guess.
One of the things, I don't think we mentioned it, but it'd be good to just spend a second with it. Can you tell us a bit more about some of your influences, some of your writing influences? I know you've mentioned The Godfather and, you know, reading lots of screenplays, but tell us about what else you're reading.
So when I was growing up, I've been thinking about my bookcase in my room, what it had, my bedroom, my parents' house, and I used to read a lot of Malcolm X because I loved the rhetoric, I loved the language, the sound of the language, the flow of it, and I came from a really conservative Muslim household, and he was the first time I read something by someone who I kind of could relate to. I could never find books by people who looked like me, and there was this really, really beautiful, lovely small bookshop in the city of Bradford that I used to go to called Shared Earth, and I used to read a lot of Black literature, African American literature. I used to read a lot of Maya Angelou. I read everything I could get my hands on. I read every speech I could by Malcolm X. It was before the internet, so I'm not sure how I did it. I must have looked at the back of the books and then got names. I read a lot of that. I also used to read a lot of feminist fairy stories, which I'd completely forgotten about. Stuff like Someday My Prince Won't Come, Women Who Wear the Breeches, and then I loved Arundhati Roy. I think that was the first book I fell in love with, was The God of Small Things. Just reading that book, I think it had a phenomenal effect on me. The beauty of language and the succinctness of storytelling on a page.
Let's for a second talk about your essay in It's Not About the Burqa, which is a phenomenal collection of essays by Muslim women that came out in 2017, I want to say, or 2018?
2019.
2019. I had two guesses and I got them wrong. Yeah, I guess it feels like it's been out for a lot longer. Edited brilliantly by Mariam Khan and featuring such amazing writers. And your essay really captured a moment. I really remember when it came out, and just you were the conversation for those two. You were. It's often referred. You were the main character on Twitter for 2 days, and people were really, really interrogating the stuff that you were writing about. Can you just tell us about that essay?
So that essay I wrote about myself, I kind of flashed the world with my past, which I'd been quite ashamed of. But it was time to write about it. And somehow on Twitter, I met Mariam Khan, and she said she was putting together this collection of essays, and she wanted someone to write about divorce. And I thought, well, who knows more about divorce than me, having been divorced a couple of times before, by the time I was 27, 25. And I just thought it was time to write about it, and to write, kind of to put it to rest, but in a really honest way, and to talk about interpretations of faith and how it had made me feel. So I wrote about my life, really, and there was quite a long lead time for it, but it was quite painful. It literally was bleeding onto a page. I would close my laptop, and then I would call my sister or my best friend, and I'd cry, and it was quite cathartic and it was quite therapeutic. It was literally about me. I'd been married quite young at 21, and then got divorced 3 months later, and then I got married again, I think at 23, and then that hadn't lasted. I'd found myself in a really abusive family situation, and I'd left. And at that time, it was 20 years ago. Nice girls from Pakistani families didn't do that. It didn't happen. You know, you only did that if you just didn't do it. And I did. And I came from a really ordinary, nice, loving family. I didn't come from a force. There was no force in it. I just was going along with my life. So I wrote this essay, and then it was featured in Weekend Guardian, and I thought it would go away. I'd literally given birth 2 weeks earlier, that bonus baby I mentioned, and it just went nuts. And it had 250,000 hits in the first 2 days alone. It was mental. And just the emails I got, and from all over the world, I still do. People, and my sister said to me that I've probably ended a lot of marriages, because I think a lot of women message me to say, I need to get a divorce, how do I do this? Or yeah, but it was wonderful to do it.
There's a novel in that, by the way. But sorry to
They were like, you really have emancipated all these women. Yeah, it was a journey.
So I've got 2 more questions, and then we've got a bunch of questions in the Q&A and a bunch of questions that were sent in earlier today. But so obviously there'll be a lot of writers watching this. And I know you've talked a little bit about lessons that you've learned, but I just wondered if you had any great bits of writing wisdom from writing the Khan, and from it, you know, gestating for as long as it did, and what that tells you about writing.
Writing takes a long time. You know, when people say, I got this 6-figure advance and I wrote this book in a month or 3 months, that's not necessarily the best thing that happens. You need to sit with your story, and you have to love it. You do have to absolutely adore those people and stay with it. And it depends. You have to remember that you've got to, what I could tell myself was, if I could go back, it would be, you've got to buckle in for the long ride, and what you want is a career with longevity. You don't just want to be a flash in the pan. And that does take, I know it's trite, but it takes hard work. And every day you sit down at that page, you are honing your craft, and it pays off, totally pays off. You'll notice it at the end. Where now I read it back and I think, I wrote that, that's quite good actually.
Yeah. And in a couple of years you'll go, oh God, I wrote that.
Yeah, thanks. I will. I absolutely will.
That's how I feel about every time something new comes out. I look back at stuff at the start of my career and go, oh yeah, that could have done with a bit more time.
Well, it does feel that way. I said to Abby, I said, look, I feel like I just want to keep editing. And I think she told me about somebody, a writer, who said even when they were going to an event, they were kind of making notes on the actual book.
I told her that.
Pass on her wisdom. Yeah.
There's a thing. I don't know. It's been attributed to Oscar Wilde, but I don't know if it actually is Oscar Wilde. But novels are never finished; they're only ever abandoned.
They're abandoned. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally.
So something tells me that, given how Gia Khan and her family live rent-free in your head, we are not done with this story.
We are not done. No, there is a sequel. I am working on a sequel now, and developing that, which is quite fun. I do come into this room here and hide and write dark things.
And apart from the world of the Khan, are there other things that you're working on? Are there things that you'd like to be doing more of?
There's a couple of things I'm working on. Yeah, there are a few stories I'm working on actually. One is possibly a rom-com, which is really fun. which is called One Fine Eve, which let's see what happens with that one. That sounds quite cool. I've got a draft of a first draft of a book, which is kind of got sort of like Groundhog Day meets Sleeping with the Enemy, which is again me back to writing very dark things, and possibly a couple of TV things that I'm working on, but we'll see what happens with them.
Okay, so I'm going to go to the Q&A function. If you want to write any questions, we'll try and get to them all before past. We are, because I imagine Simon has had quite a long day. Zara asks, if this film was to be made into a Hollywood movie, yes, what actress would you want to play the lead?
I don't know. I've been thinking about this because it has been optioned for telly, but I have no idea. I think we'd have to, like, the book's supposed to be genre busting, we'd have to kind of bust someone out. Not even a thing. I have no idea. Any suggestions?
Not Scarlett Johansson.
Definitely not. No.
Heather Fit asks, did you have to bring your book up to date given that it was 7 years from writing to publication?
No, I didn't. It was, I didn't, there's nothing really time sensitive in there. And it kind of was evolving anyway. When I'd done it and I'd go back, but there wasn't really anything that was time sensitive because it doesn't really mention any news events or anything like that.
She also asked, how did you deal with the edits and suggestions? Did you feel that people were being overly critical?
I didn't. The first time I was so desperate for advice, and also I was really lucky. Everybody who gave me edit advice, from Arzu to Jenny to Helen, were just very good at giving the advice in a way where it just felt like a gift. The only time I found edits a little bit difficult, well, I've just done an India edit, and that was sort of like, because it's obviously such a different culture, that some of the questions I was a bit like, well, that's not a question, which is terrible because obviously that editor, that's their job, but that's the only time.
I love this question from Anna Miles, although it has been asked from Maya, age 9. Why didn't you give up? 7 years sounds like a long time to me. What made you keep going? I love that.
Because I've got this poem on my fridge. I think it's called The Victor. And it's about how, in the end, the person who wins is the one who doesn't give up. So, you know, if you think if I had given up, then I just wouldn't have liked myself very much. And I began to enjoy the journey. There's something, I found that it's much more fun to be on the journey than to be at the party at the end. And I found that with everything in life. The journey's always much more fun. It's like dating someone is much more fun than being married. So I just stuck to the journey, which is not what Maya wanted to hear, but it's just really fun. There is a great pleasure in pursuing something and dreaming about it. So I stuck to it.
So we had a couple of craft questions from Sue Dyed come in, and she wanted to know, how long did it take you to write your first draft? How much do you plan before you start writing? And did the characters evolve as you wrote them, or were they quite set from the beginning? There's a couple more, but we'll see if we can get to
them. I can't remember how long it took me to first write the first draft. It probably took me about 4 or 5 months at least, and that was just a very early draft. And how do I plan? So I have an idea of the start and I have an idea of the end, and I try and write down a list of, and then this happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and this happens. But I'm not as logical as some people. I know some people are really good at planning. I'm not. I get bored. So I have a beginning and an end, and I have a vague idea of what's going to go on. And then I do character development. And then I start writing chapter after chapter. And then I just don't go back to edit until it's complete. And then the best advice I had from Jenny Parrott was leave it for 4 weeks, go away, read something else, come back, read it again, and then leave it and then edit it.
Yeah, time is it's so hard when you feel like you have no time, but time is probably your best weapon as a writer.
I think in life, patience and time. When you're younger, you think time's really running out a lot faster, which is strange. And when you're older and it is running out, you realize actually it's not. And things take as long as they take. They just sometimes might take longer. And also for the Khan wouldn't have, I don't think it would have been the book it is now 7 years ago, because the audience just wasn't there. In that 7 years, other writers have come in, people like Amit Dand, people like Abir Mukherjee, and they have created a landscape that then allowed for the Khan to find its place. And then other things have happened, Black Lives Matter happened. So timing is so much of this for me.
The lovely Hamza wants to know what Desi snacks brought you joy when you were writing and editing. Was it a kind of
Burfi, pista burfi. Every time. Ambalas, pista burfi. It's got to be that.
I wish I lived near an Ambala. Okay, that was a quick answer. Jane asks, will you be coming to Bradford at some point? You can call it a fictional northern city, but with a 6:20 bus stop and all the events on Morley Street, we know it's us. Looks like we got a detective on our hands in the Q&A function.
I would love to come to Bradford. I haven't seen my parents in a year. So when we are legally allowed and we have school holidays, I will definitely be coming to Bradford.
Brilliant. And Deepika asks, hi Saima, I'm really interested in what you said about reading screenplays and then writing the story as a screenplay before it became a novel. Can you recommend any particular screenplays or screenwriting resources that first-time novelists would benefit from reading?
Save the Cat, that book that everybody loves, is very good. It's brilliant. Yeah, you've got it. I never understand the beats of it, but it's brilliant for inspiring. I also love anything by William Goldman, who I just absolutely adore. It's just, I could just sit and read his screenwriting books forever. And then just the best screenplays. Things like Pretty Woman, I read the initial draft of that and then the final draft of it, and just the sparsity on the page, that kind of thing. I read The Godfather 2 recently. That one was brilliant as well. Again, it's like, you know, it's beautifully written. It's just the imagery on the pages. I recommend them.
Can I recommend a website called the Script Lab if you, for any screenwriters, where a lot of scripts get uploaded to it. I'm pretty sure legally. I haven't looked too much into the ethics of it, but like you could basically go, oh, what's my favorite sitcom? Oh, it's The Office. What's my favorite episode? Season 4 Dinner Party, obviously. Oh, I can find the script for that. And it's a really wonderful resource for finding any script you want. I recently downloaded the Ladybird script that Greta Gerwig wrote from it, and it's just a joy to read.
And of course, When Harry Met Sally, of course, one has to read that.
This is so weird, but before we came on, I wrote down on my to-do list by When Harry Met Sally script. I've been thinking about that film a lot. I listened to, there's a podcast called Rule of Three. Sorry, I know this is your event, but
no, please tell me. The film that my sisters and I always quote for, this is what quote from all the time.
There's a brilliant comedy podcast called Rule of Three, which is where comedians deconstruct a piece of comedy. They get in a guest to bring in a piece of comedy and then they tear it apart. And that Lucy Prebble, who is like one of my favorite screenwriters, she wrote I Hate Susie, and she's one of the Succession writers, and she wrote Enron the musical. She brings in When Harry Met Sally, and it's just an hour of her and Jason Hasey and Joel Morris deconstructing When Harry Met Sally. Is just such an amazing episode, and I listened to it twice in 2 days because I've just
that's me sorted for this weekend.
Okay, sorry for that little detour. Sabina wanted to know who your inspiration for the lead character was.
Who was my inspiration? Probably her, actually, because that's my best friend asking that question. As much as
leading the witness, man.
As much as like just every kind of clever, smart woman I met who seemed to be navigating a lot of these things, and tone policing in these rooms full of men and just trying to figure out what they could and couldn't say, navigate two cultures. So yeah.
So Jan wanted to know, were you thinking of yourself as your audience when you were writing, or if not you, who did you imagine as your reader?
I didn't. I read somewhere that you should just write for yourself and not for an audience. And also, because I hate everything I write initially, probably forever, but if I imagined someone else reading it, I wouldn't write. And part of the shock to the system of having the book out there is that real people like Jan are reading it. And so then I spend all night thinking, oh my God, those people are reading it and judging me. So I just write a story for myself that I want to tell.
Um, and Kathy asks, getting to this point in your career is a monumental achievement. Have you given yourself a reward for all this?
Several rewards, but not for this particular day. No, I haven't actually. Probably that pista burfi that I cracked open at 10 a.m. that my sisters thought was hilarious.
I think you can do better than burfi.
Yeah, I need some advice really. What can I get?
A caravan. I don't know.
To put my children in.
Yeah.
A
piece of basketball memorabilia. I don't know. Jen Chandler says, "Hi Saima, it's Jen, your playground wife."
Oh, hello.
You clearly love all the characters and they're beautifully drawn, but aside from Gia, who's your favourite character and why?
Oh, it has to be Benjamin Khan. I just love him. I just love that he's this confused young man who's trying to navigate being a man, but also having this really strong sister he feels is overbearing. I love the dynamic between the two of them where she's just trying to be his sister and he's just like thinks she's saying all these things to him that she isn't saying. So him.
And Sajid Varda wants to know, what other burning issues would you like to write about?
What other burning issues would I like to write about? I would probably like to write about double agents of the patriarchy. This is how light and fluffy I am. I would really like to write about that. The way that women are with each other and about sisterhood. Probably that's exactly what I'd like to write about in my next book.
Sue Died has two questions. Do you dream about your book and your characters? And also she wants to know what your favourite book was.
I don't dream about my characters, no, which would be quite scary if I did, because I don't really want to meet them in real life. My favourite book was probably, there was a few, so I really loved The God of Small Things, and I also loved The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera. Those two books, absolutely my favourite.
And Shahanara wants to know, do you write poetry?
Not anymore. I'm very bad at it.
And Jan said she was your news editor at the
time. Jan was my news editor, yeah. So at the Telegraph and Argus. So I always want her to be really impressed by me, and I always worry about my grammar when I send her texts.
My mum in the 60s led a protest against the Telegraph and Argus in Bradford.
Did she?
Yeah, that she and her friends wanted them to stop reporting the ethnicity of criminals when they weren't white. And
I don't know if they won. Did she win?
Yeah, I think she was part of the collective. I don't think she led it. Did I say she led? I don't think she led it, but she was part of a group of friends who did that. And they did change it, which was
impressive. That's really cool.
Heather said, Saima, you sound like me, except I don't have a book published yet. You've made me realise I'm quite normal.
I don't know what that means.
I think it's just a show of solidarity. Sonia asks what for you to recommend some things that you've read recently.
I just read, I loved Dominicana, which I absolutely loved. That's the one that comes to mind. And I'm reading, it's a book by Femi.
Caleb Femi?
I can't remember the name. It's on my desk.
Light Seekers.
Light Seekers, yeah. Light Seekers. That one.
Katode.
Yes, yeah, who's really, really lovely. Reading that. And I read That's Such a Lovely Age. Is it called Such a Lovely Age or something?
Yeah, Kylie Reid.
Yes,
Such a
that
fun
one,
one.
which
Such
I
a
thought
fun
was brilliant. I was reading it thinking, how are all these people loving this book? Because don't they see themselves in it? It's just so brilliant.
such a fun.
Such a Fun Age. Yes, that one, which I loved.
Okay, so final question is from Hamza. He recently saw a TV show called Hometown by Mobeen Azhar about crime in Huddersfield, and the reaction to him was hostile. Are you worried about what Bradfordians might think of your work, although it's fictional?
This is why it's not set in Bradford, for two reasons. One is because people bring their own bias to a city, don't they, when they read about it? And also Bradford was so maligned, I didn't want people to see it and think, oh, more crime and drugs. So it is fictional. It's not, there might be the 6:20 bus stop in there, but it's not a real place. So I'm hoping not. Also, like Italians love The Godfather. They just loved it, and they kind of took it on and made it their own. And I think I know it's a crime novel, but there's themes in there about love and loyalty and um, being true to survival and that kind of stuff. So hopefully they'll take that away and not just the crime.
Brilliant. Okay, so we're just coming to the end. So I've just got a couple of really bits of important housekeeping to finish up with. First of all, I know this is a webinar, so we can't actually see any of you, but hopefully we can all raise a glass of celebratory water to Saima for this amazing achievement. Congratulations. But also, we need people to buy the book, and we need people to know about the book. Waterstones has got this amazing blood spattered edition that you can now show off, which is just absolutely incredible. The book is Times Book of the Month, which is nuts. But all of that is great. But what it really needs is support from like the amazing people who've come out tonight. So, talk about it on your social medias, recommend it to friends, leave 5-star reviews on Goodreads and Amazon and all those places. But just really, really support the book as much as you can. If you haven't got the book yet, I urge you to go out and buy it. Also, Waterstones is doing loads and loads of amazing events. Has such a brilliant digital program at the moment in the run up to bookshops reopening again on the 12th of April, which is exciting. So please check out the Waterstones website for future events. Thank you so much, Saima, and congratulations once again. I think we are going to wrap up there.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Goodbye, everyone.